Hello, my name's Gregg Braden, and I'd like to welcome you to this all-new presentation of the Divine Matrix, Bridging Time, Space, Miracles, and Belief. For 3,000 years, sages, mystics, and prophets have revered a single mysterious document as the manual that holds the consequences and the outcome for every possible choice that we could ever make in our lives. In this episode, we'll marry the best science of the modern world with the secret of this manual to reveal the unthinkable, a time map that holds the details of every major event that has occurred in the last 3,000 years, as well as the consequences that are yet to come. So I want to be very clear with you. I've done my own research, and I would not be sharing this with you if I did not believe from my own personal research that everything I'm going to share with you is absolutely accurate. I'm not saying that we understand 100% this mystery, how it has occurred, or where it comes from. But I want to say to you, what I'm going to share with you is not a hoax. And I think when you see the evidence, you'll agree with me. So when we ask, what is the Bible code? A really deceptively simple answer was offered by the 18th century scholar that was known as the Genius of Vilna. In his own words, here's what that scholar said, and this is a quote. He said, "The rule is that all that was, all that is, and all that will be until the end of time is included in the Torah from the first word to the last." And that's the end of the quote. Well, in my experience, my research, I want to tell you that every query that has ever been made into the mystery of this code has produced results that are statistically significant. They're not random, they're not accidental. And this even goes to the name of every human who has ever been entered into this code. Your name is in the Torah code. My name is in the Torah code. The details of your life, the details of my life. And when you say, how can that be? That's why I wanted to share this episode with you, because the Torah code is believed now to be a manual for the quantum possibilities that are available within the divine matrix. So we're coming back to this idea that we're living within this field, and within this field, events are unfolding. They are following patterns, they're following cycles. And now it's possible that we actually have a manual that helps us to understand how to interpret those cycles, the consequences of our choices. That's what I want to show you right now. 1 year before Rabin's assassination, a scientific paper was released in the year 1994 in the journal Statistical Science, and it described this Bible code for the first time in scientific terms. Now, the paper was written by two mathematicians. Elihu Rips was the primary author, and Doran Whitsom. The title is very interesting, and it's one of the reasons that I think the paper was not widely accepted in common circles, because the title makes it sound very complex. The title was called Equidistant Letter Sequences in the Book of Genesis. And this paper described the first experiment using computers to detect the code. So let me just share with you why that's important. Because for at least 1,000 years, Torah scholars, biblical scholars, have suspected that there were hidden codes within the Torah. And I'm going to talk about precisely what the Torah is in just a moment. But these scholars suspected that this code was there. They didn't have computers 1,000 years ago. So to find these codes, they were doing everything by hand. They were manually looking for these relationships, and it said that some of them actually went crazy. They actually went insane with the complexity of what it was they were trying to do. Well, it was only in 1994, and you think back in time, the computers that we take for granted today, they haven't been around forever. And in 1994, some of the kinds of software we deal with today were just in their infancy. Now, having worked in the industry, developing code to look for patterns, I can attest to this firsthand. When I was in the industry in the 1980s, 1990s, pattern recognition software is what we were developing, and that pattern recognition software was running on computers that are very, very different. We didn't have our Macintosh laptops that so many people use today, and we didn't have the IBM laptops and the very compact models running at tremendously high speeds with so much storage that we see today. So I'm going to invite you to keep this in mind as I describe what was happening in the 1994 study. So in 1994, the paper was released. The purpose of the paper was to describe an experiment that had been run, and the experiment was to determine if the names of 32 very famous rabbis could be identified using algorithms in the Bible code. Well, without going into all the technical details right here, I'm just going to tell you the results were astounding. They were more than successful. They exceeded all the expectations. Not only were the names of those 32 scholars there, but there was additional information that was not even queried that was coming up with their names. Well, this is where it gets really, really interesting, because that idea, that theory, was retested a few years later, 1997, during an unprecedented experiment. It lasted 440 hours. The computers were running the search algorithms for 440 hours, and this time, rather than the mathematicians that had developed the algorithms doing the work, this time the experiment was run by a former senior cryptologic mathematician for the NSA of the United States. His name was Harold Gans. Harold Gans took the original experiment one step further, and he began with the names of 66 famous rabbis. He tested those names against themselves, but he wanted to see if the dates and the places of the birth and the death for each rabbi would also show up. Well, once again, at the end of this experiment, the information that was revealed by the codes exceeded even Harold Gans' expectations. Not only did the names come up, the exact dates of the birth, the exact dates of the death, and even the cities where they were born and the cities where the rabbis died, even if they were different, they showed up in this study. Well, Harold Gans wrote a paper. In his conclusion, he stated that this is statistically more than significant, that this is no accident. There is a code that is encoded within the Torah, within the first 5 books of the Hebrew Bible, and it's encoded in a way that exists nowhere else. Well, since the time of these experiments, once the researchers discovered how accurate these codes were, all of a sudden they began to query everything, and everything that has ever been queried in the code has revealed specifics. Just for example, World War II. When World War II was queried in the Torah code, it actually spells out the words World War II. It spells out the words final solution. The code gives the name of the leaders who were present at the time: Roosevelt, Stalin, Hitler, Churchill. It gives the exact names of the countries that were involved: England, Germany, France, Russia, Japan, the United States. It even gives the words atomic holocaust in the year 1945. Now, one of the questions that people have asked me when I do lectures on this topic is, could this information be random? Could it be encoded in other documents? And what I want to say to you, to date, other texts have been tested, including Webster's Dictionary, including novels, huge novels like the book War and Peace, the book Moby Dick. And in all of these other texts, the codes do not work the way they do in the Torah. There is something about the way the Torah is put together, something about the way that it is arranged, and that something is the mystery that we're going to explore right now. The precise results are only possible with the Torah. And in mathematics, this is so interesting to me, the most stringent standard for a statistical odd to be significant is 1 in 1,000. In mathematics, typically, the Torah code odds, the odds of these things showing up in the Torah the way they do, are 1 in 100,000. So we can see statistically there's something happening here that cannot be explained by conventional thinking, conventional physics, conventional mathematics, at least as we know it today. The information coded into the Torah appears to follow the rule of mathematician Heisenberg, and he created something called Heisenberg's uncertainty principle. And that principle is summarized by Stephen Hawking, and I want to share with you in a very single specific sentence what Hawking said. Hawking said, and this is a quote, "Quantum mechanics does not predict a single definite result for an observation. Instead, it predicts a number of different possible outcomes and then tells us how likely each of these outcomes is," end of quote. This appears to be the way that the Bible code works. It does not predict what will happen when we query the Bible code in a very specific manner, it gives us the consequences that are likely, the consequences that are possible. And in this way, it is suspected that this is a quantum code. So I'm going to give you some specific examples of how this works. But I want to begin with the very beginning. I'm going to go back to the beginning of this conversation, and I want to talk to you about the Torah. Just what is the Torah? Why does it work the way that it works? Well, as I mentioned earlier, the Torah represents the first 5 books of the Hebrew Bible, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, that happen to be the first 5 books of the Old Testament in the Christian Bible as well. There's something very different about these first 5 books. The truth is, we don't really know where they came from. There's legend, there's history, there's speculation. We're told that the book was received, the book containing the 5 books was received on Mount Sinai in Egypt as a single document. And the ancient texts suggest that it was a single document that had no punctuation, no spaces between the words, a single continuous output of information. And that's going to be key in just a moment. So when we talk about the Torah, what we're talking about are these first 5 books of the Hebrew Bible and the Christian Bible. We're not talking about the Bible in its entirety. So I want to be very clear about that. Second thing that I want to share with you, I have studied as an amateur linguistics all of my life. And that's going to become apparent in the next episode of this series. The power of information being transmitted as alphabets, as language, and what that means to our lives, what it means to our bodies, what it means to our brains. One of the fascinating things that I discovered early on about alphabets is this. Every single alphabet known to exist on this earth today, ancient and modern, every letter of the alphabet has always had a mysterious number associated with the letter. We don't know for sure where those numbers came from. The numbers are stable. Once those numbers were assigned some time in antiquity, they've never changed. Every letter of every alphabet has a numeric representation for that letter. Now, some people say, well, now you're talking about numerology. I want to be very clear about this. The science of numerology was spelled out in the 2nd century as 32 rabbinical rules for how these numbers may and may not be used. So this is the science that is called gematria or gematria in the Hebrew language. Numerology is a subset of gematria, and numerology, the rules are very loose and they're malleable. The rules for the gematria are very strict, they are very specific, they're very stringent. So I'll be very clear about what we're talking about here. And I'm saying this because the alphabet of the Torah is the Hebrew alphabet, primarily, in the original versions. And every one of the letters in the Hebrew alphabet has always had a mysterious number associated with that letter. So when we talk about the Bible code, the way this Bible code is created is that each of those Hebrew letters are converted into the numeric equivalent for the letter. So instead of seeing a bunch of letters on the page, now you're seeing a bunch of numbers on the page. Once that is done, all the spaces are taken out, all the punctuation, just the way it was believed the Torah was delivered to the earth at some point in antiquity 3,000 years ago. So now you're looking at a continuous stream of numbers creating an array or a matrix that the computer can now search and query in different ways. We're looking at a matrix of 304,805 numbers, exactly, specifically, 304,805. This is the number of letters that are in the Torah. And one of the things that really helps to anchor our trust in this document is that the Torah today has this number of letters, and when we go back into the most ancient versions of the Torah, it has the same number of letters. It's a very, very stable document. Typically, texts such as this are translated and they lose information, gain information, they change over time. The Torah is a very, very stable document. This is one of the reasons when a rabbi is tasked with creating a new copy of the Torah, it's said that if even one letter is changed, that one letter could change the outcome and held the fate for the entire world. So if they got to the fourth book in this document and a mistake was made, they would have to destroy that part of the document and start over to preserve the integrity of the Torah. That's important for what it is that we're talking about now. So this matrix of 304,805 letters, it is arranged into a matrix, but it's called a dynamic matrix because it is allowed to change, of 64 rows, 4,772 numbers in each row. This is the way it begins. And as the queries begin, the queries determine where that matrix aligns. So the number of numbers in a row and the number of columns can change. It's a dynamic matrix based upon the query that is being offered. Once the matrix is established, then the queries are created using the information that the scientific paper I mentioned earlier talk about. They're using what are called equidistant letter searches, or ELS searches. So let me talk to you just briefly about what an ELS search is all about. An ELS search is commonly called a skip code, and that's a much easier term to really embrace. It means that we begin with a particular letter somewhere in the Torah, and we determine how many letters we will go through before we expect to find another significant letter in that code. It identifies what letter in the matrix to determine this code sequence. Let me give you an example to help explain this. Let's begin with a skip code of 50 in the book of Genesis. In the book of Genesis, a skip code of 50. The way we would apply a skip code of 50 in the book of Genesis is very simple. We begin with the very first letter in the book of Genesis, and this is in the Hebrew code. And I want to be specific, this code only works with the Hebrew letters. If you try to translate this into English, it doesn't work. The queries are only in Hebrew. So if you're going to query the Bible code, you have to understand how to query it in the language that it was written in the Hebrew language. So in the Hebrew language, the book of Genesis, a skip code of 50, we would begin with the very first letter of the code, very first letter of the book, and we would count 50 letters, or now that the letters have been converted into numbers, 50 numbers over. And when we do that, the very first letter that we see is the letter T. So the 50 letters in from the very first letter of the book of Genesis is the letter T. When we go 50 more letters, the next letter that we find is the letter O. When we go 50 more, the next letter that we find is the letter R. The next letter is the letter H. In the Hebrew language, vowels are omitted. So what we're seeing right now, a skip code of 50 could be considered a primer. It tells us of how this code works, and it tells us that the skip code of 50 in the Torah produces the word Torah. So this is one of the first things that the biblical scholars found a long time ago. And based on this, they said, what happens if we try other skip codes? What happens if we allow the computer to use those skip codes for us? The results of this work were made popular in the mainstream in the year 1997. They were released as a book that was called The Bible Code. The author, a journalist, his name was Michael Drosnin. So maybe you read the book, the first book, The Bible Code, and there were many subsequent books that came later. To bring us all together, the beauty of understanding the Torah code is that the Torah code is the map of possibilities within the program of time running under the divine matrix. We are part of that program of time, and we are subject to the rules and the laws of time until we understand them. And then we also understand that our biology gives us the way to hack time. We can short-circuit the processes. We can short-circuit these cycles when it comes to the healing of our bodies, for example, or the peace between nations. And all of this is possible because we are now unlocking the mystery and we're telling a new human story. And it's a story of us and our relationship to the matrix that underlies all reality. Whether we're looking at the big events of the world or the details of our everyday lives, everything that we experience is happening within possibilities already coded into the ancient map of time, into the Bible code. The scientific key to choosing our possibilities was preserved in some of the most ancient and indigenous languages of the past. In the next episode, we'll discover that key, how it works, and what it means in our lives. So I want to thank you for joining me today for this episode, and be sure to tune in for our next all-new episode of the Divine Matrix, bridging time, space, miracles, and belief.